Everybody knows these requirements are silly, but some companies now are kind of hamstrung because they fired people over them. So what do you do? Mark Chenoweth back with us again from New Civil Liberties Alliance. Mark, glad you could make time for us today. Hello.
Thanks for having me this morning. Good to be with you, Chris.
So that's the bottom line. For people that have lost their jobs over this mandate stuff, is there legal recourse, do you believe, here?
Well, I think it'll be tough for the folks in the federal government, too, because of the sovereign immunity problem that you typically have. There may be some people who work their way all the way through the civil service complaint system. They may be able to make some sort of charges stick, but I think it's going to be really tough. I think the good news here is now that the federal government has finally seen the light and pulled back on this, that at least will create the space for private companies to do the right thing, which they should have been doing all along. I understand why some folks might have felt like they needed to do these mandates, but as soon as we found out that the vaccines didn't stop transmission of the virus to third parties, there was no reason to mandate the vaccine for anyone.
I think about the number of people, I know so many people, in nursing in particular, who have reached out to me. I mean, I have an email box full of people who have come from the medical profession that had to walk away from their jobs over this shot, who loved their work, absolutely loved it, and are heartbroken that they had to leave it. Is that the way it's going to stand? And I mentioned, employers that I know in broadcasting that are in this weird spot. They know this is over. They don't have to require this anymore, but they're stuck in this place where they got to act stubborn about it, because if they don't continue to insist on vaccine verification, that sets them up, I guess, legally, doesn't it? If they fired people over not having it, they then, what, in perpetuity are going to have to insist everyone they hire has proof they had it?
Well, that would be crazy, right? I mean, we can't continue to operate on old knowledge, and the problem the government had here is that it was continuing to perpetuate false information even after the government knew that the vaccine didn't stop transmission to third parties, even after the government knew that natural immunity worked and was actually more robust than the protection that the vaccine was giving to folks. And the private sector bought into this false information that was out there. You talk about the nurses, Chris. These people were heroes. These
Yes.
people were on the front lines battling COVID when all of us were scared. We didn't know about this virus. We didn't understand exactly how deadly it was, how to fight it, et cetera. Then a lot of these nurses and doctors and so forth developed natural immunity because they contracted COVID and they had the antibodies. And then, even though they were protected and they weren't spreading it to other people, they were being fired by some of these medical establishments, and I think that's just criminal. It's just immoral to fire these heroes who were fighting the battle on the front lines.
And again, I don't mean to put you in a box here, but I'm very, very curious. If you have fired someone in the past over not having had a shot, do you not, as an organization or a company, set yourself up for lawsuits if you later hire people and don't require that? So I mean, can a company be sued because they? Let me ask it this way. So I'm fired because I didn't take the shot, and then I learn a year later they start hiring people back and not ask about their shot verification. Do I have a case then to turn around and sue people for firing me over something they're no longer requiring?
Well, I don't think that should be the logic that companies use, Chris. Partly, we're talking about the federal government. I don't know why they're waiting until May 11th to unwind the mandate. I mean, nothing's changing between now and later this week. I mean, if you're going to end it now. Mm-hmm. But there is something about that deadline. If a company were to wait until after that, they could at least point and say, look, we had it in place when the national emergency was there. When the declaration of the national emergency was lifted, we stopped requiring it. That's it may be an illogical line in some sense, but it's at least a defensible line, I think, if someone were trying to come after the company for its policies.
Mark Chenoweth, President, General Counsel of the New Civil Liberties Alliance. This is not why you're here, but I know you're a bit of a legal scholar, so I'll ask, although if you punt, I understand. Biden is threatening to use the 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling if Congress won't do it. And I am not studied in constitutional law or the 14th Amendment, but I've never heard of this. I know it was some sort of Civil War era action the last time it was deployed for obvious reasons. Can you imagine a scenario where the President of the United States could unilaterally raise our spending without Congress and using the 14th Amendment to do it?
No, I can't. I mean, the only possible thing I could think of would be if there were a state of war that had been declared, then you might have something with the commander-in-chief powers that would enable the president, solely for purposes of funding the military. You could maybe conceivably, on some sort of very temporary basis, imagine something there, because the president does have commander-in-chief powers, but that doesn't extend to raising the debt limit in any sort of general way. And I can't imagine how the 14th Amendment plays into that. That's not what that amendment was written for and not what it does. So that's I think they're grasping at straws. And then, Chris, the thing that I don't understand, and I was up on Capitol Hill for 2.5 years when we had one of these debt ceiling debates back in 2011 timeframe. There's plenty of money coming into the Treasury to pay the debts of the United States. The problem is they want to pay the debts of the United States and do all the crazy spending that they've been passing over the last couple of years, and there's not enough money to do that. So, here's a thought: pay the debt and stop spending on the things that aren't debt, and then you don't have a problem. You don't need to even raise the debt ceiling, or certainly not nearly as much.
Here's the conversation with this Stephanie Ruhle on MSNBC. She hosts some sort of show called The 11th Hour. I wouldn't watch it if it was the second hour, but anyway, The 11th Hour with Stephanie Ruhle. She's got Biden on the show, and she brings this up. And it's like everyone's talking about this now. ABC's talking about it. They're talking about it this morning on CNN. They're just dropping it in casual conversation. Well, sure, you could just go around the Republicans and invoke the 14th Amendment. It started Friday. Take a listen.
As I said, you have a very strong economic recovery story, but this is a very volatile Congress. There are members of Congress that might be okay with us defaulting because they think it could hurt you more politically. Given that, are you prepared to invoke the 14th Amendment and blow through the debt ceiling?
I've not gotten there yet. And here's the deal. I think that, first of all, this is not your father's Republican Party. This is a different...
No, sir.
A different group.
All right, so blah, blah, blah. And then he goes on to attack Republicans. But she throws that out there, which tells me this has been planted. If all members of the media are saying the same thing now, they're all singing this song. Are you prepared to invoke the 14th Amendment? And then he always sounds like the reasonable one. Oh, no, I'm not there yet. Yet? As if he could get there, Mark.
Well, and I thought it was interesting in her question, she asked about default. And again, the only way you default on the debt is by not paying the debt portion. That's a very small part of the overall spending that the government does. And there's no reason why the Treasury can't pay the debt, the service on the debt that's coming in, and not pay other bills. Prioritize the service on the debt. There's plenty of revenue coming in, and there will be plenty of revenue coming in June, July, August, September, October to pay the service on the debt. It's the other spending that they want to continue to do alongside it that poses the problem.
You noticing the theme here? We opened by talking about emergency COVID rules.
Yes.
Now we're talking about emergency debt ceiling hikes. There's a running theme that when Democrats have control of the executive, everything becomes an emergency, and they can use executive authority to usurp Congress over and over and over. That's the running theme. Concentrated power.
To take the power of the purse away from Congress, which is the most important power that Congress has, is the ability to control spending. You take that away, if the executive can self-fund, then we no longer have the separation of powers. We no longer have the ability to stop runaway spending and a runaway executive. And, there are cases pending in front of the Supreme Court right now on things like the fact that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau isn't funded by Congress. It gets its money from the Federal Reserve. I think that the Supreme Court is going to have to crack down on these sorts of crazy, unprecedented kinds of executive branch spending. And if this 14th Amendment theory is tried, I think that's not going to fly either.
The New Civil Liberties Alliance, President and General Counsel Mark Chenoweth, nclalegal.org. Mark, it's a pleasure to talk with you this morning, sir. Thanks for your time.
The Chris Stigall Show Podcast.